Everyone. I hate to interrupt conversation, but we'd love to get this session started. So I appreciate seeing all of you here. I know that there are many excellent breakout sessions to choose from in these concurrent sessions. So I really appreciate you spending this time with us this morning. We're having an engaging panel discussion on promoting bold, forward-looking action for an inclusive future, kind of extending the discussion that we had just a brief moment ago. So as many of you know, 4 years ago, ABRF committed to promote equity, inclusion, and social justice alongside many other organizations due to events that actually happened in this city, right? And so, unsurprisingly, these commitments continue to face societal and political challenges, and to put it mildly. And today's panel of leaders come to us from across the STEM ecosystem to discuss the role of societies such as ABRF, core facilities, institutions, and individuals in working together to overcome these challenges. Before I ask them all to introduce themselves, just a moment of kind of how we're going to do this today. They'll introduce themselves and kind of their backgrounds, where they come from. I have some questions for them to help engage and create discussion, and then we'll save about 25, 30 minutes for questions from you all. So please jot your questions down as we move through the conversation. So with that, I will briefly introduce them and let them introduce themselves more fully. We have Feather Ives, who joins us from the West Coast in UC Berkeley as a core scientist herself, and also our DEI award winner this year, and will be speaking more on the work that she does tomorrow afternoon. We have Rachel Croson, who's the provost of the University of Minnesota and has done a lot of work in the space of gender and sexual harassment and promoting much of the work that we do in core facilities, right? Helps support the strategic aims that Provost Croson uplifts at the University of Minnesota. And then we have Stephanie Goodwin, who was our plenary speaker today, but also works very closely with organizations like ours, and will be speaking about kind of the work that she does in that setting. So, Feather, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Feather Ives, and I'm so happy to be here today. I am, in addition to working at a core facility at UC Berkeley, I lead and direct the Merritt College, which is a community college, programs for microscopy, histology, and genomics. All three of those programs I completed in 2016, 2017 as a career changer. I enrolled, I'll tell more in depth of the story tomorrow, but I enrolled in those programs I started on my daughter's first birthday. I had been a stay-at-home mom. And so I used them to get back on a science track that I had been diverted from in the 90s when I did not have mentorship to go into STEM and basically medical school was what I wanted to do. But I stuck around because I use it to help students stay on track, and that's very important to me. So yeah, that's it. I really don't spoil it for tomorrow. Come to the talk tomorrow. I'll tell you all the things.
Great. I'm Rachel Croson. I am not in the natural sciences. I'm an economist. My research is in experimental and behavioral economics, really on the boundary between economics and psychology. Previous to my position currently as provost of the University of Minnesota, I was the dean of the College of Social Science at Michigan State. Any Spartans here? Go green. So in the meantime, I got to say go Gophers, because you've got to change your allegiance periodically. As Mary alluded to, when I was on the faculty track before I kind of jumped into the administration, I was very active in the Committee on the Status of Women in the Economics Profession. Women are significantly underrepresented in economics compared to all the social sciences and almost all of the natural sciences. And so we developed a set of mentoring workshops. We did research. We used random assignment to identify the impact of those workshops and showed that they significantly increased publications, grants, and likelihood of getting tenure. So that's been a little bit of my space and my journey here.
Hi. So, can you hear me?
No.
Oh, it just feels different than that mic. So my name is Stephanie Goodwin, pronouns are she, her, hers, and I too am excited to continue to be here after my plenary. So, you know, I came at this work as a social scientist studying issues around power and impression formation. So I started my career looking at things like, why do powerful people stereotype their subordinates when subordinates actually work very hard to get to know their people up the chain. So I've been thinking about issues around equity and inclusion for a very long time, but initially in a very basic science kind of a space, thinking about cognition, thinking about bias in those ways, and then moved into doing some work on speaking up to prejudice and what does it mean, how do we do it, what is effective. But then I moved into leadership for the first time, working with an NSF Advanced project in Dayton, Ohio that was a multi-institutional award where we were working to affect equity in STEM by just trying to, all kinds of things to try to change policies and practices and change the way our institutions were working. That led me into working in faculty development in the provost office at Wright State for a little while. And then I continued to collaborate with people in the advanced community after I moved into that role and realized I really enjoyed working across institutions, that working in one sandbox was not as much fun to me as working across spaces. And so about 5 years ago, I moved into consulting full-time. I now work with institutions around the country on a variety of different kinds of efforts, strategic planning, programming on how to speak up to bias. And also, I am the co-PI of an award with from the National Science Foundation with the American Geophysical Union. That project is called LANDING. We like our acronyms, right? Stands for Leadership Academy for Diversity and Leadership Academy and Network for Diversity and Inclusion in the Geosciences. And I am the lead for implementing the Leadership Academy for that project, where I work with cohorts of individuals who are current and aspiring DEI leaders, but who are geoscientists by training, and we build their capacity to understand the work, understand how to persuade people to do the work, and implement their projects. So that's where I'm coming from with the institutional side of things.
All right, excellent. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I have lots of questions. Where do I want to start? So our focus for the meeting this year is preparing today's cores for tomorrow's needs, which means a diverse future, right? And an inclusive future. And so I guess to start off with, how would each of you define bold, forward-looking action? And how might we do that in the current setting that might make that challenging?
So maybe I'll go first. At least in my world, we think a lot about what's coming around the corner. In fact, people talk about the biggest skill set you need to be an academic leader is to see what's around the corner. And I think that's important and good, and we're all aware of what's happening now and what's likely to happen, given that we're looking around the corner. But in my mind, what bold, forward-looking action means is not only anticipating what's coming, but working now in order to shape it, in order to create it, in order to change the trajectory of where we're headed. And that means there's a lot of different actions you can take in order to do that, from participating in panels like this one, to writing in public forums, to training people, to changing the practices and policies of your own institution or your own professional association or whatever that happens to be. But the I here is to go beyond simply preparing yourself for the future that's coming to shaping the future we want to live in.
Sure. So I am on the core leadership team of a program called PAIR-UP, which is an imaging, it's a support group for Black imaging scientists. And right now, I'm just going to be very frank, everything right now that is anti-DEI is anti-Blackness. And so to be bold right now is to acknowledge that, okay? We are currently facing whether or not we can actually continue to be an organization that supports Black scientists that are underrepresented in the imaging sciences. And to deny that that is a concern or a problem is to be in denial of the whole issue around the need to focus on Black scientists and their psychological safety in these spaces. So we've had to lawyer up. That's bold, forward-looking action. That preparedness, right? Being prepared, and we've had to find a lawyer who specializes in anti-discrimination and prepare us for potential lawsuit if we continue to be an organization that supports Black imaging scientists, the handful of those who identify as Black imaging scientists. And this includes scientists who use imaging, not just core facility folks, but that's a very specific action. The next thing as core facility folks is to continue to support an organization like PAIR-UP. So what PAIR-UP does is we bop around to different core facilities and do workshops. This year it's Allen, NIH, MBL, and one other one. But we've been to Rockefeller, UC Berkeley hosted one, Zeiss at their ZMCC in Dublin hosted one, and as organizations, as core facilities, continue to support organizations that are specifically supporting demographics that are struggling in this space. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I have broader thoughts on what bold action means. One of those is having moral courage. I think I reflect, for example, I'm an alumni of the University of Texas at Austin. I have colleagues in the project I was sharing with you at AGU who work at University of Texas at Austin on equity issues. And although they were not yet fired, many of their friends and colleagues were. And I was pretty horrified that this organization that I identify strongly with, my undergraduate years were formative in helping me move out of my own bubble as a white person who lived in a middle-class neighborhood and had maybe one person who was a person of color who was in my friend group in high school. College mattered. That experience mattered, and seeing what happened there has horrified me because the University of Texas system is a pretty powerful system, and I think a little moral courage would have gone a long way in terms of getting the legislature to go a different direction. So I think we have to find a way to hold on to that courage in order to, and that's a bold thing to do right now because there's a lot of risk. Yes. Okay? It is easy to say that we disagree, but it is much harder to stand up. Yeah. And say that out loud. So writing opinion pieces, putting our voices forward, writing to our alumni associations, writing to the state governments that we live in, where we don't live in, letting people know what our values are. I think that matters. When it comes to professional organizations like ABRF and others, I think part of showing moral courage right now is not going beyond what has been required. A lot of times the lawyers are coming in and they're leading people to overreact. So they're looking so far around the corner that they really have a very blurry vision of what's there. And people are so fearful right now that they're overreacting. And I think we have to have enough courage to say, this is what the law says. this is what we've been told we cannot do, and there's nothing else, right? All of these other things don't fall within that. Maybe we need lawyers to help us clarify and understand where those boundary conditions are, but not to fall victim to our own anxieties in a way that moves it even further away from our values. That's something I think is bold right now.
Yes. Tanya is my co-chair of the DEIB Council.
Hello. Okay. I just wanted to add some context because probably for a few of us, so I don't know for how many people we know the context of this question, but this is regarding the consequences of the Supreme Court decision of basically get rid of affirmative action. And then most people thought it was just going to, some privileged black kids won't be able to go to Harvard. But the actual implications, because of the way the law is written, is that basically anyone who has federal funding has to respond, get rid of DEI, or lose the funding. So the question that Mary asked is very relevant for us in ABRF because we, as an organization, we don't have federal funding, so we can be bold.
We do.
Right?
Not currently.
What about 18?
It
Not
didn't
yet?
happen.
Okay,
yet.
and can I clarify something?
Yeah.
We didn't initiate needing a lawyer out of anxiety. We were brought to and asked to remove our focus of being a black organization, and then we were either going to change our parent organization or we were going to get legal counsel. So there is a lawyer, Oppenheimer, at UC Berkeley, who does pro bono work in this space, and he has told us to hold our ground and basically is giving us that legal advice. But no, this was not something that we got anxious about. We actually were asked to change because of anxiety from
Other people's anxiety.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, so,
But thank you for that clarification because it has had implications since the law passed.
but the law does not specifically say you have to shut down DEI. The law says you cannot use race or gender or other identities in making decisions about recruiting students. That's what the law says.
Well, so one clarification, it actually does not say anything about recruiting students, it's about admission.
Admissions.
It's about admissions. It's
That's
a
right.
very specific law. So I'll give you an example of what the University of Minnesota has done. So we had a checkbox, as all universities do, where the applicants revealed their racial identity. We continue to have that checkbox because we needed to report to Ives and other federal governments, but the responses to that checkbox is hidden from the set of professional admissions officers who are making the admissions decisions. That was compliance with the law. On the other hand, we had a question, we have 3 essay questions, short answer questions for our applicants, and we had one that was optional about tell us about how your identity would contribute to the diversity of the university. We made that question required. That is also not inconsistent with the law. So it is not that we can't use race at all or that we can't look at somebody's race. It's that we can't make decisions on that basis. Right. And the Supreme Court ruling was very clear that you need to make decisions on the person-by-person basis, not based on their membership in a given class of individuals. Yeah. And so we have examples in training for admissions officers about if a student was the first black president of their high school graduating class. That's absolutely information that you can use about how they, learned to talk across differences, about how they overcame challenges. If you don't have to ignore the fact of race, you just can't make the decision on its basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not stopping the institutions from freaking out and making changes that have nothing to do with admission.
And on behalf of the offices of general counsel everywhere, their job is to protect the university from lawsuits. That is their job. So they are doing their job here. But ultimately, it's up to the president of the university or whoever is responsible in this case to balancing off the costs and the benefits, the risks and the potential in any given one of these decisions.
Right.
But I want to come back to, that we are not working in isolation as organizations, but we tend to forget that. So I'm going to forget the name of it, I'll try and find it, but there's a group of presidents now who've formed a nonprofit organization so that they can work to bring leaders across academia together in order to address these challenges and how it's impacting at the state level. The laws at the state level are really where the problems are coming from right now. In Texas, my own state, Ohio, Tennessee, there are 11 states right now that have enacted what they consider to be divisive concept laws or anti-DEI laws, many of which preclude any funding going toward any activity that would be DEI. And that might include, for example, someone at your organization registering for a conference and spending federal dollars, even spending federal dollars that are not state monies to attend a conference where they do work like we're doing right here, that's considered taboo or is forbidden under some of those laws. So, but we forget that we can work collectively. We are not alone, right? So ABRF is part of a broader ecosystem of STEM organizations, professional societies, and as professional societies, we can work collectively in ways that we might not be able to work on our own. Within those organizations, though, I think we can be doing a lot of things that are perfectly within the law, like having codes of conduct, actually enforcing those codes of conduct. We can do those sorts of things. So I'm sorry.
You are great. I appreciate the conversation, and it actually leads really well, I think, into the next question I have. In today and in other settings, I think all of you have talked about the importance of leadership, right? And the importance and the obligation we have to speak up. And I would say that all of us in this room are leaders, correct? Regardless of what our particular role is in our organization, we're leaders and you're here. And so, given the challenges, right, that you're talking about to sustainable equity and inclusion efforts, how do we as individuals or as a collective keep equity and inclusion front and center when making decisions, even if we have a state DEI law that says we can't have DEI offices or DEI initiatives? So how do we keep that front and center when making those decisions? Because I feel like that's really easy to forget about.
Sure, I'll go first a second time, but then someone else has to for the next question. So at the University of Minnesota, we have a DEI initiative. We have a democratically controlled state house and legislatures. So although we are still getting inquiries, how many people do you have employed? How much do you spend on them, right? There's definitely a movement there. But one of the things that we did is to adjust our budget process. So there's a saying, if you want to know what an organization values, you follow where it spends its money. We had a group which was colloquially called the Budget Five: the provost, the chief clinical officer, the chief budget officer, the SVP of finance and operations, and the vice president of research, which ultimately kind of made recommendations to the president and the Board of Regents for budgets. And about 2 years ago, we decided to add the vice president for equity and diversity onto the Budget 5. And so the idea was that she could have, she's fantastic, she's been doing it for a couple of years now, but she could have both insight into and input into what we funded, where our money went. And, so now it's the Budget 6, and that's been, I think, a really positive addition. We were already directing funds to lots of DEI initiatives, and of course that didn't change. But the fact that she was there, that she could provide nuance about this is more important or this is less important, or there's some duplication here, these are multiple groups all doing the same thing, maybe we want to raise it up a level, or kind of changing what we funded and how we funded it. That's been, I think, very important for our organization, and I encourage people to think about what their budget structures are, how the funds flow, and who makes those decisions, and including people for whom that is their day job can be really valuable.
You know, I'm in California, things are a little different. I'm in the Bay Area where things are a little different, but in my spaces, I'm going to speak just to my spaces. So I work at the core facility, and one key thing we've done is just, it's so small, I feel like my world is not the policy. I'm not speaking at the policy or institutional level, I'm speaking at the individual level. Making sure that the people in our space are diverse in all ways, gender, identity, sexuality, identity, and just, it's not just me and Holly and our voices, and Holly's, you know, I don't know if you guys know who Holly is, my boss. She runs the core. Keeping everything diverse, our advisory committees. At the community, I work at a community college. Faculty is diverse. Everybody making decisions. It's not just one way. I don't have just only black women working with me, okay? That's the analogy. My dude wall is not all women of color. But yeah, I mean, go there, and I'm going to finish, see if I have any more thoughts.
Okay.
But just making sure that the voices around me are diverse is just fundamental. That's it. It doesn't need to get super complicated or deep, and that bit about budget is so real. Like, where you put, and that's the one thing I get really irritated about, is that people don't, like, I'll say that to my president, and I'll say that this is at the community college, and I'll say that to my vice president of instruction, and then I'll get what I want because I said that. Like, if you value this, put money to it. Especially my initiative to increase my particularly my black students who are graduating from my program. We have you'll see tomorrow, we have a great distribution of most of our groups, but we know our initiative is black and Latino males in the sciences, and we need to put money toward that. Pay them to do these programs, pay them to be lab assistants in our programs, pay them to do internships at off-site third-party sites. So, you know, being bold.
Yeah, so I want to tag on to something about budget first. Yes, and all of those, yes. You know, sometimes it's not that the budget isn't there, it's that the people can't use it. And I'll give you an example. I work with an individual who works at a science-based research institution, research lab, and lots of people wanted to work on equity and inclusion things, but there was no charge code for their time, and they had to charge all of their time to a code. So the barrier was a practical one. There was no way for them to say, I spent an hour today working on these activities and can get paid for it. And so the change that had to happen was pretty simple. They went in and said, can we have a charge code for when people attend a meeting or work on programming, or, you know, so that people could get paid for what they were doing. And that made a huge difference, because people who wanted to do the work now were willing to do the work because they didn't feel like they would be penalized for how they allocated their time. So sometimes it's about really digging into the practices and understanding what is the barrier that's getting in the way. And that really is, when I said audit practices, I mean really dig into them and ask people, so why aren't we doing this? Or what is the thing that we're doing that's not aligning with our values for equity and inclusive practices? The second thing I would say is, we need to keep our values front and center. And by that I mean they're not just in our mission statements and a website somewhere else, but that they are forward in everything that we do. When we convene, they're sitting on the first screen. I love how in every room you've got all of these things up about your code of conduct. That's a good way to remind people, what we call those cues for control in psychology. They cue people to remember what they should be doing in the spaces they're in. When we cue people and remind people about these values in the work that we do day to day, people are more likely to integrate those values into how they behave and how they make decisions. So keep it front and center, make time for it if you're a leader. If you write the agenda, put it on the agenda. Make some time in every space for what are we doing to support equity and inclusion in our unit, in this team? Like, where is it? Like, somebody has to write the agenda, and if we never make time for it, it's not going to happen because we're busy. STEM scholars, scientists, we have very busy jobs, and the only way we're going to attend to it is if we carve out real time to have those conversations. And then the third thing I would point you to is some work that's come out of the American Council on Education. Kazar and others have done this work on something called shared equity leadership. And it's a model for thinking about how we all engage in ways that build across organizations. Some other people in leadership might call this boundary spanning leadership. But the idea is that we break down silos and we truly bring in voices. We don't just say, oh yeah, we want to hear from you at the strategic planning meeting. Please put your sticky notes on the wall and put your little stickers on top of them if you're voting them up or down. But we really bring people in and bring people into all of these structures to participate in ways where they drive the conversation. They don't just okay it. And we need to do more of that. So.
All right, we have about 45 minutes, but I want to hand it over to you all in the audience first and then give us some time for some follow-up. You want to come up and use the microphone?
Hi, my name is Gabby. I work at a national resource facility, and so we kind of serve, anyone and everyone who sends samples to us. But through my time working there, I've been there about 2 years, I've recognized that core facilities are really concentrated at like these R01 universities, and that individuals at minority serving institutions don't have the same access to core facilities. So I'm just curious if the panel has any ideas about democratizing access to core facilities. Is this at the university level? Is this at the state level? Any thoughts on that would be great.
So yes and yes. I'll add that at the university level, so of course we worry about who we're serving. We want to, of course, serve our own faculty, but we also want to serve everyone who could value from the services that we provide. So one of the things that we've done is reach out to specific universities that are either HBCUs, so University of District Columbia and North Carolina A&M, and A&T, sorry, and our native colleges here in Minnesota, and written kind of MOUs about ways to include their faculty or invite their faculty to come and participate using our facilities. And, this involves negotiating different rates. I won't say the rates are zero, but they're different than the rates that we typically charge. And also including opportunities for those faculty to learn about what it takes to run a facility and how to manage one. And part of that is their own professional development, and part of that is just kind of building capacity around what it is that these facilities do. We don't think that just replicating facilities in multiple different places makes a lot of sense, but opening access, having sliding scales about what you charge, and providing training, we think is really important.
Yeah. Through PARAP, we've tried similar things. When we first started, we were trying to find funding to fund folks in more remote areas to get to other facilities. We met with some stakeholders at NIH and NSF. In an ideal world, we'd have all the bandwidth to do all the things that we want to do. We just don't. And just even trying to do the access to instrumentation. So that's what sort of PARAP does, is it will fly any member to see instruments at different cores across the country. And so when we meet at the core, like let's say Rockefeller, or where was the one in Tennessee, Vanderbilt, the folks from that area would then be invited to return in the same sort of way, right? Especially if they didn't have a specific instrument that they really thought they could use at the workshop. then I know that some of our companies, our instrumentation companies, are repurposing some of the older instruments and getting them to institutions that don't have the instruments as well. So I know Zeiss does that. I think Leica has a program. We're shipping stuff to, South Africa and West Africa now through Genelia. Not we, the people who can do that. But those are some of the things that are being done, but definitely it's being tried, and that's what part of PAIR-UP has been trying to do.
Yeah. So I don't work in a core facility, so I'm going to speak to this from a different set of experience and say one of the key barriers to people sharing resources is that they don't know where they are and they don't know how to find the conduits to get in and use them. And part of that's, it might be easy to say we're going to create a website, but nobody knows the website's there, so that's a problem. And one of the things we have to do is build more connections. So we have to do the work. If we have the resources, we have to do the work to build relationships with those institutions to share the information about what's available. That can be very simple. It can be, NSF, for example, has all kinds of informational panels about their research programs, right? The directorates and their calls for proposals. You could have informational sessions at every conference you go to about the resources and how they're available to all institutions. Those can be tables at conferences. Those can be visiting other institutions, but build relationships so that people know you're there if you're available. And then when you do make it accessible, figure out what the barriers are for people to actually use the tool, right? So in the NSF Advanced project that I worked on, it was multi-institutional, and there was a person on one campus who had the thing that was really valued, and everybody wanted to use the thing, but it was in a basement, in a building that this person could not access because they didn't have a pass. And so how do you get the pass? You gotta go through the whole process and make it possible for people to actually get the thing that they want to use. So think about the whole process, and don't ignore those little barriers. And then the other thing is there are lots of funding mechanisms. NSF has CREST and other that they're really pushing MSIs to partner with R1 institutions. There's money out there, but it has to be a true partnership or they're not going to give it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to actually add, the DEIB Council has been talking about, so many of you in the room are probably familiar with the S10 mechanism, right, for funding expensive technology. And there was recently a call out for S10 proposals specifically for historically underfunded institutions. And a member of the DEIB Council is very active in that S10 space and was very concerned that none of the submissions would actually get funded. And that came to fruition. None of the submissions were funded. And we're talking about how do we make sure that the individuals have the knowledge of how to write a successful S10. Yep. So ABRF, we have lots of people with the knowledge of how to write a successful S10, right? So how can we share that with our colleagues at these historically underfunded institutions? And then the other piece of it is that the mostly white, mostly well-represented individuals that were reviewing those submissions did not have the training to do that in a holistic and unbiased manner, right? So how can we, as an organization of core facilities and who are submitting these S10 grants, make sure that we are training reviewers in mechanisms that would enable them to review those more holistically, and to think about the biases that they're bringing to the table for those particular reviews. So that's something we're talking about and would encourage all of you to maybe reach out to us, but also look at your next chapter meeting or perhaps the next annual meeting where we maybe try to bring these discussions and workshops to the fore. All right, other questions? Flo.
This is a little bit too high for me. There we go. I'm short. Hi, I'm Flo. I'm at UC Berkeley.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
I know you, Flo.
Yes. Senior, probably. I have maybe a little bit of a different question. So I currently mentor a group of high school robotics students. It's a Title I school. That's 100% students of color. They ask me all the time, does it get better in the workforce?
No.
Especially my Latinas. And they look at me and they are like, in all of what I do, and they're just like, does it get better? And I'm like, no. And I struggle with this because I want more, like the way that it will get better is more representation, us being in this space. But I also want to protect them.
Yep.
And it's like hard to balance those two. So I guess just wondering, how do you balance that? How do you like look at the future, the youth, and be like, it's gonna suck, but if we keep doing this, it will get better.
Right.
Yeah, and so how do you balance that?
That's such a good question, and it's one that I live with too. I have kids too. I do teach dual enrollment, but I also have adult women who are in toxic workplaces. My job is to put people into jobs. I have over 40 employers that I have, that I know, and about 10 that I have solid relationships with. And I would say of all those employers, maybe 6 are safe places to work. People are happy. The rest of them, I have had to start a support group for my Black female students and for my women students because they could possibly quit without that support group. And I don't want them to quit. I want them to persevere, and I want them to find outlets to, kind of deal with that toxicity, and then build the skills to get out of it too, right? Like, what else do you need to do next to be the boss, to be able to effect change? Because what's odd is there are people in charge who look like them, who aren't making sure that the places change. It's just like this weird thing to me. I've got to figure that out. I got to get into psychology, organizational psych, to figure out how to whip that and change it. But they have to stick to it. We do need more numbers, and just keep making sure that they have that support group and that mentorship along the way. That will make a huge difference, that they're not alone, right? I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that tomorrow. But my employers, let me get back to the employers. My employers know the work that I do. They know that I teach equity. They know that I teach anti-racism. They know that I teach what I teach, and that the students have expectations of the workplace, okay? It doesn't mean that anything changes. I can't change Kaiser. I can't change a union that protects horrible people. You know what I mean? But I can tell those students, just don't go work there. I am very clear about where not to work. And then the relationships that I have with my employers, because I have to make sure they enter the pathway and have opportunities for exiting the pathway, that, look, these are the places to try to shoot for. And I'm just clear about that. And that's what we work towards. So just making sure they know that there's a path from high school through 2-year or 4-year institutions to a job that, or entrepreneurship too, right? There's tons of companies that could be started, Berkeley doesn't even have a histo core. And I recruited somebody who was in a very toxic situation. She's now my co-teacher, to come. I was like, hey, can we start a histo core? And then like 6 months later, we were starting a histo core. It's really great. I'm not funding it. Somebody with money is. But it's really, she's out of that toxic situation now and going to build a healthier histo core. But there could be so many more businesses that are histo cores in the East Bay because very few exist. I don't know, I'm rambling right now, but there's entrepreneurship too. So anyway, I hope that helps. But let's connect, because we're like right next door.
So your question's interesting to me because I, 2 days ago, was at a summit for this group, this work that I do with the landing group at AGU. And the topic of our discussion was inclusive DEI leadership and dealing with resistance. And we frequently have conversations about, are we unethical, right, to recruit people into a field where we know they are going to encounter toxic environments. And that's really a challenge because we know and we want to protect people from that. And I'd ask you all to reflect on what it means to protect and what there's some challenge behind that word. Protecting people is preventing them from achieving something and treating them as though they can't navigate themselves. And so I think rather than protect, I think the words we should be using are empower. we should be empowering people to develop the resilience that they need to cope with whatever it is they're going to encounter in the workplace, whatever that might be. Might be something to do with their identity, it might be something to do with changes in the way the work is done and needing to retool. There are lots of things that people have to do to navigate workplace challenge. But fundamentally, the thing that's valuable to people who are underrepresented is what one of my colleagues refers to as squadding up, right? Building your squad, having your network. When your students leave, they shouldn't leave. They should still have their network. They should still have ways to connect with people who understand them. And they should have the skills to build the networks and the new environments they're going into. Because that's what creates the buffer for people when they encounter those challenges and allows people to be resilient and be empowered to navigate. The other thing that is a strong recommendation from many, including women of color who come and do this work with our group, is get your students to learn how to navigate working with people who are therapists early before they need them, so that they're comfortable and confident working with people when they're encountering these kinds of life challenges, and they already have a relationship to go to, and make it normal for people to be in therapeutic relationships, because those things are necessary. Many of us need them, and so, thank you. Sorry. You.
I mean, I would just say my answer to that question of does it get better is it can, and you can make it so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm not going against you, Stephanie, but I would like to go a little further because to me language matters.
Sure.
Right? So she says protect, and I'm like, and we feel like, yes, we want to protect, because if we don't, the consequences are terrible, right? So one of my spiritual political mentors is a writer called Bell Hooks, who died several years ago. And when I read these words, I'm like, this is it, right? Because when people think of people of color, people have been minoritized, excluded, right? They think about and they comment how resilient we are, how I can keep showing up in this space.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, she's so resilient. And I'm thinking, yes, but at a terrible price,
Yep.
right? From panic attacks to high cortisol to whatever you can think of, right? The level of psychological safety is high, and it has an effect on me. So Bell Hooks says that we need to accept our marginality, almost like a badge of honor, and then within that space that is marginal, build a space of resistance where we invite ourselves to the conversation, and we the centered awareness and to the topic of the panel, and to be bold that way. Yeah. And that is more empowering than anything else, because it's like, I belong here, I'm here, and marginal, I'm in a marginal space, and I like it.
So, and I think protect also is a word that I know I feel comfortable with when I have a, Black female or a Latina female who's looking at me kind of maternalistically, especially if there's like a 20-year age gap, right? Yeah. And I'm all like, you're here. It does kind of feel like protection. So I think about language too a lot, and that kind of cultural awareness around language. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say that my concern about the word protect is sometimes it leads people to not create opportunities, or because people are.
You're right.
It can limit. So, for example, I don't want this person to have to navigate that that department where I know there's a sexual harasser, but that's a great department, and that would be a fabulous job. And so, do I not support that person because I'm protecting them? And I think the way to get around that in some ways, protection is also about being transparent, being honest. So creating that space, the way psychological safety happens is through people understanding in part what they're navigating. And I can't control other people's behavior in that space, but I can certainly control my own understanding. And we need to work to help students label and make the right attributions. So, for example, we need our students to understand, math is hard. It's not about your gender or your race or your ethnicity. Everybody has to work on this. It takes practice. There are things that you're going to have to learn. We have to help people understand how to make the right attributions when they are encountering those barriers, that it's not about their ability, it's not about them, and that those systems can be changed.
You're right. In an attempt to protect some students, I have kind of steered them out of certain, not that, I still don't think that those opportunities would have been good or that they would have missed anything, but I have used that to steer them out of situations that maybe they needed to go to and learn. And have had some of them go to those situations and go, this place is horrible. And I'm like, well, I tried to protect you from it, but they're learning and they're navigating, and that is building them. And that resilient thing, I don't want to be resilient anymore. I'm tired of being resilient. And this is why my space is really curated with people who don't bring toxicity. This is my own personal space, not including my students. Sometimes they come and they're, but my coworkers, so who I hire to be in my space.
Yeah.
I'll just add that I think it's a difference of identifying as part of a historically excluded group versus serving as an ally as well, right? And the language that you use. If I were saying I'm trying to protect a group of individuals that don't share my identity, that's going to be maybe construed as I am unaware of my privilege and I have to do this for these people, right? Whereas as a member of the LGBT community, I have a level of protection that I might put in there that I'm not going to for others. I'm going to empower, right? So it's a tough balance. Stephanie talked about in her session earlier, though, like how we communicate, subtle communications, right? And how that impacts the way that people feel in the workplace. And I think that teaching people, I think we all learn this inherently, but also teaching them how to recognize the subtle communication of that this is a good place to work. Yes. Is really important for trainees and for the people that we're mentoring. At my institution, one of the things that I get regular feedback about is we provide something called safe zone training. If you're not familiar with it, it's focused on discussions around the LGBTQ community and the language and the vocabulary, and then at the end of that, people have the opportunity to take a sign that says, I am safe zone trained. And we've been doing that at our institution for 7-8 years now, and these signs are everywhere, right? And that communicates to people of all different communities that this organization is willing to have some of those hard conversations, regardless of whether or not they're LGBTQ or identify as LGBTQ. So those subtle communications too, and teaching our mentees and our trainees how to look for those in the workplace, I think is super valuable as well.
Yeah. So what you just shared, Mary, reminded me, some years ago there was a book that was published called The No Asshole Rule. And when I was reading it, I took it to my son's gymnastic class and discovered people look at people's book titles and realized I had to put a different book cover on it. But that experience of having other people look at me and go, why are you bringing that here, made me realize I could use that. I could use that as a cue, and I would put that on my desk when I would have meetings with people who were known to have sphincter issues. And I could bring it to meetings and send a signal about who I was. And I will do that in meetings. I will carry books around that are about inclusion and equity, even if it has nothing to do with the meeting I'm going to, because I want to signal to other people who I am and what I value, and make sure people understand so that when they do say something that's problematic, it's sitting on the table in front of them who I am. it's not a surprise to them that I'm going to be somebody who says, hang on a minute, I'm concerned that we're not behaving in a way that fits our values here, because my values are front and center. So I love the idea of those signals, right? The signals on the door, the sticker on the door, they send signals, and you're right, the more the community sends a shared signal, the better it is.
Tanya, there's an extra seat up here.
Right.
Hello. Okay. No, I'm going to address that. I was invited to the panel, but I have a lot of social anxiety, so that would be terrifying for me. So that's why I'm not there. But so earlier, when we were talking about how come I'm not sitting there, I said, do not worry. If I'm triggered, I will speak up, and my social anxiety will go away. So that's probably in the space that I'm right now. And the word protect triggered me, and I was thinking here, why? And it's because it's the same word that is used for the dynamic that develops with white people protecting each other. And it's called white solidarity. It's when they develop this amnesia, where they don't remember the things that somebody else said, even though we were all in the same meeting, or where they don't report acts, or where they just gaslight and say they didn't say or do that. So to me, that word protection is very related to the system of whiteness and to white solidarity. So that's why marginal place of resistance.
I love it.
I love it. Other questions? Yeah, Nicole.
You know what I'm going to say.
I can guess, maybe.
Okay. So I'm Nicole White. I'm at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, Research Foundation, both. I was really excited to see two institutions up here that are part of a very large movement that happened in the 1970s, but I haven't heard much conversation around this in the inclusion discussion. So I'm going to just comment and allow you guys to explore ideas and thoughts, because this is an area that I do spend a lot of time, and that's with disability. Berkeley being 1970s, about us, not without us. University of Minnesota has one of the greatest intellectual developmental disability clinics, and it's hard for me to say coming from Cincinnati Children's, but you have some phenomenal leaders there that I stalk a little bit. But my passion is on trying to develop more inclusion and disability, not only within employment and opportunities and within our societal justices that need to happen still, but it's one of the largest disabilities among the American population. And it breaks my heart, because I don't know if how many of you know this. In September of 2023, that is when the NIH finally recognized people with disabilities as having a health disparity. Think about that. September of 2023. And that was not a decision that came easily. If you guys know a lot of the background conversation that happened and what it took for the NIH to even come about and recognize that. So what does that mean? What that means is people with disabilities are not included in research. They're not included in science. They're not included in understanding how to navigate healthcare systems, how to navigate employment opportunities, how to navigate just being able to live independent lives. And this is something I live day in and day out, because I have 4 children, and 2 of them have intellectual disabilities. And I'm imploring you guys to explore ideas on how you can develop more inclusive practices within your organization. Think about the universal design as you're looking at construction projects for science. People with physical disabilities, are they able to be employed in the STEM field because their wheelchair can't hit the right counter height in the lab? Why aren't they there doing research? They have just the same abilities. Look at your websites. Do you have text to read on your website so people with visual impairments can understand what they're trying to read on a website? Are they too wordy? Are they visual enough? We have a lot of neurodivergence within science. And so this is an area that I think we need to have also a lot more conversation while still having conversations on race and ethnicities. because disability crosses all of those things.
Absolutely.
Everything. So it's something that I just implore people to think about and consider and bring back to your organization and ask questions. And I'm happy to be a voice too, because I do a lot of this work within children's, and we're piloting a program within our core facilities to hire people with intellectual disabilities to work in our core facilities, because there are a lot of routine, redundant activities that they can be a part of, and it's an area in which people with disabilities find the least amount of opportunities for employment, because typically we tend to put people with disabilities in hospitality, food, wiping tables, taking out the trash. I walk through the cafeterias and I see those people and I go, my daughter's not going to do that. My daughter's going to do something better, and I'm going to find a way for that to happen. So keep expanding, keep thinking, keep talking. There's always more ways to be more inclusive. So I just wanted to share that.
Don't mean to make it seem like I'm not including my.
No, I don't think that at all.
So I just wanted to touch on that. It's really interesting that you bring it up. I am at a community college. It is so UC Berkeley aside, my work is with a very inclusive, open science program at a community college. And we attract everyone who has been excluded or cannot find a way into the sciences, right? So that means that we are always getting academic plans for different students. And the most recent one I had was a student who is on the spectrum, and she was really having a hard time being a histotech, but she flourished in microscopy. We have 3 programs, and she flourished in the online human genetics course. So when she cut herself and didn't know how to put the Band-Aid on and didn't know to continue to apply pressure, I had to have meetings with her because I was worried about her safety. I uncovered how little support there was for anybody on that work plan, on the plan to, doing our CE courses, career education, and then entering the workforce, right? So I met with her SAS counselor, student accessibility services counselor, and found out that there's a whole center once you're finished with the program to help you get a job. I'm sorry, where's the help to help her navigate? What are her options in her field that she wants? So I had meetings with her parents. She was in her 30s, so I was like, if your parents need to be there, let's have your parents there to support you. I had to fight to get everybody on board. I didn't fight everyone, but I had to fight the institution to be like, show up. Like, we can't just say you can't do science. You're not safe as a histotech. But histotech is cutting biopsy tissue with very sharp knives. You might know that, I don't know. But I wanted her to do where she could excel. And we have now worked with her she's going to be doing our genomics program, continuing our microscopy program, but just not leaving her behind. And we have several stories like this in our program. And getting her support from student services to be stronger in advocating for her and supporting her. I am faculty, and I believe that there's a lot that I'm supposed to do as faculty, but I cannot do it all alone. And that is what was becoming very clear, was that me and my other co-director of the department and then my co-teacher, Sarah, were the 3 who gave a damn the most. And it was like, we need everybody on board with the students' success. So yeah, and then all of my courses are designed to 508, which is our state standards. It's really ADA standards, like really cool. So I am right there with you, with UDL, individual student plans that keep them in STEM and successful, absolutely.
Yeah, and that is one of the hardest things at organizations when it comes to employment, because if you do have a disability, you can't ask them as an employer. They have to self-identify. And a lot of organizations are also very ill-equipped with having disability services or even letting their own employees know that they exist.
Yeah.
So it's just a challenge at so many organizations.
So I'll add, thank you for the call out. We have an excellent group of researchers in this area.
They're amazing.
We're very proud of them. One of the things that we did this fall in response to a University Senate resolution is institute a mandatory training for all instructors on disability services, on universal design, on all of these kinds of things, especially around their coursework, right? As you know, whenever you ask faculty to do mandatory training, it's a little bit of a struggle. But what was amazing when we launched this fall is the incredibly high level of voluntary compliance. Usually you have to send multiple emails and you have to tell the dean that the faculty didn't do it and twist people's arms. We had none of that with this training, none of that. So it seemed, at least to us, like this is an area that faculty actually cared about. It's like 3 20-minute segments. So it's not arduous, but it is important. And I think our faculty, at least throughout the organization, regardless of what they studied, really recognized that this was something that was important for them to understand. I'll also call out a friend of mine who's neurodiverse, who recently got hired through a special program at Goldman Sachs. So there are some pretty high-level organizations that are looking to attract and retain people who are neurodiverse because they understand that, you know, he's really good at like concentration and focus on things that a non-neurodiverse person wouldn't be able to do. And so finding the tasks within your organization that these individuals can thrive in, that they can contribute to the organization, and kind of steering them there and assigning them there, I think can be really valuable.
And that's a good point for me to call out Project Search. It was founded at Cincinnati Children's, and now they've rolled out 500 programs worldwide on how to train employers on how to support people with disabilities and get them trained for specific jobs. And I can give you the contact name of that person if anybody wants it. She's amazing too.
Yeah. So I'll just say to that, I think in higher education, there is at least some basic capacity because of laws that require institutions to make accommodations for students with disabilities. But those don't translate very well into supporting faculty and staff at those institutions. And I think getting back to what you were saying, employers aren't very competent in this space as well. Even understanding universal design and what that means, like what does that mean? You were talking about what's on the website, how busy is it, how hard is it to navigate? But I think our work lives are also not designed in ways that are very supportive of neurodiversity. We have work lives that are very multitasking and driven and no time for breaks and cultural norms around what it means to be productive and what it means to be focused that do not acknowledge that we are human beings. And so that's part of our challenge. And I would say that, you know, one of the things we can do is start building those, building that capacity building into things like onboarding for employees. You know, we sometimes have modules for equity and inclusion, but they don't include anything about neurodiversity or disability, even beyond the most basics. But we need to teach leaders and managers how to navigate in spaces that don't reify stereotypes about those groups, while at the same time supporting those individuals. So again, you know, coming into it from a lens of how do I empower people to ask for what they need, whatever that need might be, and how do I make sure that the pathways are there for them to get those needs met? And I think people are like, HR, right? Handle it. Like, that's the typical response, and that shouldn't be the response. And HR's like, you know, I mean, we're really good at the physical stuff. We're really good at physical navigating, like, oh, you need a ramp, or you need a special height chair, or you need, you know, but we're not very good at anything else. And I think that's in part because we also have a very narrow view of what disability means. So.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Actually, I just had a comment on that physical space issue. The University of Colorado, they put in all these great handicapped accessible doors into the building, but then you can't get anywhere else. There's no button to open the door to get to the elevators. And then if you do get into the elevators, once you get out, you can't get out of the elevator room because neither door on either side has accessible.
Yeah.
It's not accessible. It's not accessible. You can't, if you go into the back of the lab space, they're terrified of what you're going to do if you're on wheels. I spent 6 months on a knee cart, and they were like, oh, well, I don't know if you should come back here. What if you run over something? I'm like, well, why would you have something I could run over? I mean, somebody could trip over that.
Yeah.
It's just incredibly frustrating. And when you talk to them about it, what their response is, well, we've met the ADA law.
Yeah.
Compliance.
We are compliant.
Yeah. Well, even our hotel lobby here, there's no way to access anywhere to sit down in the hotel lobby that has a ramp. The ramps all go to places with no seats. So, you know, part of the way we get change there is we tell people. So I noted to the staff, they were like, just go have a seat if you want to go eat something. I'm like, I have all this stuff. Like, what if I were in a wheelchair? Like, or I was using a roller, you know? So we have to, we can pay more attention to that. Yeah. You had a question? I'm sorry, Mary.
No, you're great.
I'm short.
So I want to thank Nicole for bringing up disability and neurodivergence and how that is often overlooked when we have these kinds of discussions. I know like that's happened a lot in the past in my departments that I've worked in. So a little bit of a story time. I'm neurodivergent. Autism, ADHD, the anxiety, that crippling anxiety that comes with it. When I was in graduate school, my advisor refused to acknowledge that my brain worked a little bit differently than his and the workers and our research scientists in the lab. And I felt I got a lot of harassment throughout my 6 years of graduate school to the point where I was eventually kicked out. Luckily he let me defend in the end, because I was getting so much harassment of why can't you make a simple shopping list, supply list? Well, that's because not everything you wanted was actually on the list you gave me. If it's not on the list, I'm not going to remember that it exists, all that. But I was a graduate student, very vulnerable person within the department. My degree completely depends on my advisor not kicking me out for causing a fuss, for being a problem child. So I wanted to know kind of what resources have you seen are very helpful to helping to empower those graduate students to be able to speak up and not face the backlash that I did, where I finally spoke up, I got kicked out because I became a problem child, even though my whole department knew what happened because I was highly respected in the department, just not by my own advisor. So what kind of resources have you seen have been very successful in protecting students with neurodivergence and other disabilities in order to speak out like, hey, this is actually a problem, whether you want to recognize it or not, I guess is, yeah.
Sure, so I'm so sorry to hear about your experiences. I know that's painful. So again, I'll talk about the University of Minnesota, and other people can chime in about their own experiences. So of course we have a Disabilities Resource Center, which is wonderful and supportive and importantly well-respected on campus. So the training that I mentioned, they delivered this, right? Developed it and delivered it, and the uptake, I think, was a signal of the fact that faculty value the work they do. But graduate students, as you noted, are particularly vulnerable because there's often this one-to-one relationship between the student and the faculty, or the student and the advisor. And so one of the things that our graduate school has been somewhere between encouraging and mandating is that graduate students have more than one person, whether it's an advisor or a mentor or someone who they explicitly report to, or whatever that is. So that if you end up in a challenging situation where the person you would normally be connected to was not complying with the directives of the DRC, or not offering the accommodations that were needed, or dismissing somebody without a lot of evidence that they needed to be dismissed, there would be somebody else in the loop who could counsel the student, who could represent the student at the university level, who could intervene, like who's a colleague who could intervene with the faculty member. So I think, this model that we have in graduate education of, apprenticeship, it's not a bad model, but it's not enough. And we clearly need more, and that's kind of how we've been handling it.
Yeah, so I want to echo, my sadness that these things persist and that it happened to you. I will say one of the challenges when it comes to neurodiversity in STEM and student success, anyone's success advancing in their careers, is that in particular in STEM, we have a lot of lay theories about intelligence and what it means to be smart, what it means to be good at science, what it means to be good at sort of cognitive stuff. And there's a stereotype about brilliance that's associated with being in STEM. And that stereotype really boxes us in and leads us to perceive that if someone, like a graduate student or an undergraduate student even needs 15 extra minutes of time to reduce anxiety to complete that task, that somehow we're not measuring mastery when we do that. If we can't do it fast enough, if we can't do it in this way, the way we've always done it, that somehow you are deficient. And we've got to break that model. We really have to stop thinking about mastery and ability as doing it under time constraint and within this time frame in this way with these, this font size. There's so many ways that we have defined what it means to be successful that is defined and anchored in expectations about how our minds work that are not, they don't map onto the reality of how our minds work because they're predicated on those stereotypes. So one thing we can do is challenge those stereotypes. Not the students, that's going to be hard. As she said, I'm so glad you brought that up, is the most bizarre power dynamic, and impossible interdependence. And that's why it is so important to have other people who can advocate. And so, did you want to add to that?
No, not from a grad school perspective, but I am sorry that happened to you. And it's what happened to me in the 90s as a child. And that's why my dreams were deferred until my 40s, So just get back on I'm hoping that you were able to get back on your path because this is it. But yeah, higher institutions like mine, it's sort of built in. You can't get away with a bunch of shit, So, but it happens.
Excellent. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to all of you for participating in the conversation today with your wonderful questions and pushing us to open up our discussions even further. We will have a DEI networking lunch tomorrow afternoon at 12:15 in this room. So if you would like to join us for that, please do so. We encourage you. And then please join us for the DEI award presentation immediately after that lunch by Feather. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.
But not before the therapy dogs.
And the therapy dogs.
That is like peak scheduling.
Yeah, that was, right before yours.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary.
All right.
Great show.
I hate to
Lovely to meet you. Yeah, thanks so much.